Hello, and thank you for allowing me to share my research here at the Community Music Assembly. My name is Kevin McNally. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Limerick, and my research focuses on the community gamelan orchestra, gamelan being the tuned percussion tradition of Indonesia. And this particular community gamelan is in the southwest of Ireland, in a town called Skibbereen. And now I'm fascinated by the way that ensemble playing draws people into confederacies, not just with their fellow human players, but with the instruments and the spaces in which the experience takes place. My hunch is that the mutual tuning in that happens in the listening event is a model for ecological awareness. First, though, I want to critically examine what versions of community and what versions of ecology I am invoking. For this, I rely on the resonances between the work of community music scholar Lee Higgins and philosopher Timothy Morton, author of Ecology Without Nature. Morton believes that nature with a capital N has been a hindrance to truly ecological awareness because it is a kind of a reification of nature as something separate, disenchanted, and belonging to a prelapsarian past. Higgins detects a similar tone in expressions of community which contain, quote, romantic echoes of loss and recovery. Neither community nor nature are actually stable realms over there waiting for humans to access and apply meaning to them. Morton introduced the term subscendence as the opposite of transcendence to name the phenomenon of implosive holism, which means, simply put, that when it comes to concepts and categories, the whole is always less than the sum of its parts. Now, while this initially might seem counterintuitive, especially when dealing with a community music ensemble, there is a logic at work which has empathy at its root. Conventional holism, i.e. the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, treats individual parts as subsumed within the identity of the whole. The parts are considered mechanistic and therefore replaceable, and the identity is imposed from the top down. Consider the passage, humankind, quote, humankind is ontologically smaller than the humans who make it up. There is so much more that humans do other than be parts of humankind. Humans modify their bodies to change their gender and add electronic and decorative prostheses. Humans form relationships with non-humans. Humans contain non-humans, such as the microbiome. In a similar way, Higgins voices unease with the conservative connotations of community. The act of hospitality at the center of his formulation of community, quote, becomes a refusal of any interpretation of community that privileges gathering over dislocation. His equivalent of subscendence is community without unity. This version of community resists reification by keeping membership open to constant negotiation. The ecology in the community I yearn for is diverse and reciprocal. Just as we overflow the conceptual category of humankind, on a more local level, any definition of community must recognize that the individual members will overflow its boundaries, rendering them, those boundaries that is, open-ended and ragged. For Morton, all beings are strange strangers, because the more we know about them/us, the more uncanny they/we appear. Friend or enemy, cuddly bunny or COVID-19, we connect whether or not they fit into our received definitions of nature or community. Hospitality in the ecological sense, quote, depends on an uneasy sense of welcome. Who's going to show up through the door? The COVID-19 pandemic itself is a powerful form of ecological awareness. It reminds us that indeed we are the world, but not in the happy, clappy Dr. Dolittle way. This is a terrifying and brutal form of global interconnectedness. Now, how might a sound epistemology break with harmful patterns of thought? Thinking and knowing through sound, what Stephen Fell calls acoustomology, is a pathway towards an understanding of our existence in which the unescapable relationality of everything is honored. Sound is in between. It is both mediator and mediated, always unfolding, occupying all space, but belonging to no particular place, always already a part of the environment, rather than belonging to its source. This provides an updated frame for not just understanding, but experiencing hospitality. Indeed, closing our eyes and perceiving sonically we can appreciate better that we are not a collection of bounded units whose clearly defined surfaces meet, but rather we are at various depths of entanglement in a murky ocean of noise. Morton believes that, quote, art provides a model for the kind of coexistence ecological ethics and politics wants to achieve, end quote. For me, ecological art does not just represent, but it induces the experience of the encounter with the other, in which boundaries of inside and outside are questioned. I often use group improvisation, and I see the role of the facilitator as setting the conditions under which the listening / performing / composing event can take place. Each member of the orchestra is a feedback loop with agency over the direction of the whole, yet no individual part exists separate from the rest. The gamelan affords this mainly through the ease with which sound can be made by inexperienced players, but also through the sheer materiality of its sound. One example of this group improvisation is something based on the acoustic niche theory. Now, acoustic niche derives from acoustic ecology and stems from the fact that in any given ecosystem, and you can see here a visual representation of the sonic spectrum in an ecosystem, different bird species and different species in total tend to occupy their own niche within that spectrum of frequencies so that they don't have to compete and sing any louder than necessary. Some of you may have noticed this during lockdown. In practice, this means that I would set up a cycle of say 8 beats or 16 beats and allow everybody to join one by one, playing a tiny micro phrase, maybe 2, 3, or maybe even one note. The only rule is you have to avoid playing in somebody else's acoustic space. It requires careful listening from the participants, and when it works, it creates rolling grooves and melodies that seem to materialize from nothing, slowly clicking into place. In an open improvisation, every point is a point of entry. The boundaries are open. Metrical synchronicity is not an absolute requirement, and there is no sense of destination. Like evolution itself, there is no telos. Moreover, the lack of a recognizably Western scale in the gamelan blurs the distinction between melody and accompaniment for the participants. Ecologically speaking, quote, since everything is interconnected, there is no definite background and therefore no definite foreground, end quote. Now, the lockdown has obviously thwarted my methods by keeping the members of the gamelan orchestra apart, its instruments locked away, alone and silent. But while we wait to return, I find solace in the artistic inspiration for my research. Irish philosopher-poet John Moriarty, who's a man who knew that there is no hard barrier where culture ends and nature begins. There's nothing at all between our human and non-human selves. And I will leave you with a quote from him. In his efforts to open and make the land safe for human habitation, Hercules clubbed it. In his savageries, he clubbed it, clubbed it, clubbed it. All of its dragon energies he clubbed to death, sinking down into the music common to all things, that all things were composed of. Orpheus was symphonic, more, he was homeophonic with all things, as, in turn, were all things, snake and lion, with him. In this wise, he was able for the world more or less as he found it. At ease with the animal in himself, animals in the world around him were at ease with him. So which will it be? In Ireland, which will it be? Orpheus and his song, or Hercules and his club? Thank you.